Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan built the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen, stretching from Korea to Hungary at its peak. Born as Temujin around 1162, he united the fractured Mongol tribes and then turned outward with a military machine that moved faster and hit harder than anything Europe or Asia had encountered. His armies killed an estimated 40 million people, which was roughly 11% of everyone alive at the time. The Mongols didn't just fight battles, they used terror as a weapon. Entire cities that resisted were massacred as examples, with survivors sent ahead to spread word of what happened. If you surrendered immediately, you might be spared. If you fought back and lost, every man, woman, and child could be killed. This psychological approach meant many places simply opened their gates rather than face annihilation. Attila the Hun. Attila the Hun earned his nickname Scourge of God the hard way, leading massive cavalry armies that tore through Europe in the 400s. He commanded the Hunnic Empire at its peak, and his strategy was straightforward. Show up with thousands of mounted archers, demand tribute, and if you didn't pay up, his forces would burn your city to the ground. The Romans, both in the west and east, paid him enormous sums just to keep him away. When he did attack, entire regions got depopulated. His horsemen moved fast, struck hard, and left scorched earth behind them. Cities that resisted were razed completely, their populations killed or enslaved. By the time he died in 453, his name had become shorthand for brutality and chaos. Even today, calling someone an Attila means they're destructive and merciless. Timur the Lame. Timur, better known as Tamerlane, built his empire in the late 1300s and early 1400s across Central Asia, and he did it through absolutely ruthless conquest. He's credited with killing around 17 million people, which was roughly 5% of the entire world's population at the time. That's a staggering number when you think about it. His signature move was constructing pyramids out of human skulls after sacking cities. These weren't small piles either. We're talking towers made from tens of thousands of heads stacked up as warnings to anyone who might resist him. His campaign stretched from India all the way to the Mediterranean, and wherever his armies went, they left cities burned and populations decimated. He died in 1405 while planning an invasion of China. Vlad the Impaler. Yildiris Vlad III ruled Wallachia in the 15th century and earned his nickname through his favorite execution method. Impalement meant forcing a sharpened wooden stake through someone's body, usually starting at the rectum and pushing it up through the torso. The stake was carefully angled to avoid major organs so the victim would hang there, still alive, sometimes for days. Vlad impaled tens of thousands of people, Ottoman soldiers, political rivals, even merchants who cheated on taxes. He'd arranged the stakes in geometric patterns outside his castle or in massive forests of the dying visible for miles. The whole point was psychological warfare. Enemies approaching his territory would see thousands of rotting corpses still mounted on poles and think twice about attacking. Ottoman records described entire armies retreating after witnessing his impalement fields. This guy became the inspiration for Dracula centuries later, which makes sense given the sheer brutality. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte came out of the French Revolution and ended up dragging Europe through over a decade of nearly non-stop war. From 1803 to 1815, this guy fought campaign after campaign trying to dominate the continent. He was legitimately brilliant at military tactics, winning battles against coalitions of multiple nations at once, but that brilliance just meant more fighting, more invasions. More conscripts marched off to die in places like Russia and Spain. The death toll from his wars sits somewhere between 3 and 6 million people across Europe. That's soldiers freezing to death in the retreat from Moscow, civilians caught in sieges, entire towns burned during campaigns. By the time he finally lost at Waterloo in 1815, an entire generation had been wiped out for his ambition. Shaka Zulu. Shaka Zulu took power around 1816 and immediately rebuilt the Zulu military from the ground up. He ditched the traditional long throwing spears and gave his warriors short stabbing spears called aikolwa, named after the sucking sound they made when pulled out of a body. This forced close combat, which was way more brutal and effective. He organized warriors into age-based regiments that lived together and trained constantly, creating a professional army instead of part-time fighters. The discipline was extreme. Warriors who showed cowardice or failed in battle were executed on the spot. His expansion campaigns triggered the Mfecane, a cascade of mass migrations and wars that spread across southern Africa. Entire tribes were wiped out or displaced, and historians estimate somewhere between 1 and 2 million people died in the chaos. Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico in 1519 with about 600 men and proceeded to dismantle one of the most powerful empires in the Americas. He wasn't just fighting battles, he was playing politics, turning indigenous groups against the Aztecs while systematically destroying their cities. When the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan resisted, Cortés besieged it for months, cutting off food and water until people were literally starving in the streets. His forces killed tens of thousands during the siege alone. After the conquest, the real devastation kicked in. Spanish diseases like smallpox swept through populations with no immunity, killing millions. Cortés also established the encomienda system, which was slavery with a different name, forcing indigenous people into brutal labor conditions. His playbook of divide and conquer, total warfare, and ruthless exploitation became the standard model for how Europeans would colonize the rest of the Americas. Alexander the Great, Aedera Alexander of Macedon, took the throne at 20 and started conquering everything in sight. By the time he died at 32, he'd slashed his way from Greece through Persia all the way to the edge of India. His standard approach was pretty straightforward: show up with a massive, well-trained army, demand surrender, and if a city refused, utterly destroy it as a warning to everyone else. Sure, when Thebes rebelled early in his reign, he leveled the entire city and sold 30,000 people into slavery. Later at Tyre, after a brutal 7-month siege, he crucified 2,000 men along the beach and enslaved another 30,000. His troops were efficient and disciplined, which made the slaughter faster. He wasn't just expanding territory, he was erasing anyone who stood in his way, leaving a trail of razed cities and mass graves. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul between 58 and 50 BCE was one of the bloodiest campaigns in ancient history. Over the course of 8 years, his legions killed somewhere around 1 million Celts and enslaved another million out of a total population of maybe 3 million people. That's staggering when you think about it. He wasn't just fighting armies, he was systematically breaking entire cultures. When a tribe resisted, Caesar would sometimes order every man, woman, and child killed as an example to others. At Avaricum, his troops slaughtered roughly 40,000 people in a single day. The wealth and glory he gained from this genocide funded his political rise, and when the Senate tried to strip his power, he marched his army into Rome itself, triggering a civil war that destroyed the Republic. Qin Shi Huang became China's first emperor in 221 BCE after conquering all the rival kingdoms, and he unified the country through absolute terror. His philosophy was legalism, which basically meant the law is everything, and breaking it gets you tortured or killed, no matter how minor the offense. He's famous for the Great Wall, but here's the thing. He didn't build it from scratch. He connected existing walls using hundreds of thousands of forced laborers. Estimates say around 400,000 workers died during construction from exhaustion, starvation, and being worked to death in brutal conditions. If you questioned his rule or had different ideas, you were done. He buried 460 Confucian scholars alive and burned books that contradicted his worldview. China was unified, sure, but the body count was staggering.